All right, I want you to do something for me right now. A little physical task to get us started.
Okay, I'm ready.
If you happen to be in Australia, just reach into your wallet. If you're listening from overseas, well, maybe go check that jar of leftover travel money you keep on the bookshelf.
I know the one. Full of strange coins and maybe a 20 kroner note.
Exactly. I want you to find an Australian $10 note.
Yeah.
Got it.
The blue one.
The blue one. Oh, look at the front. You've got that distinct, cool blue tint.
Mm.
And, well, staring right back at you is a man in a hat. He looks calm, dignified, maybe a little rugged around the edges.
It's an iconic piece of portraiture, really. And if you have incredibly sharp eyesight, or, better yet, a magnifying glass, take a look at the area just around his shoulder.
Oh, yeah.
You'll see these swirling lines of text. At first glance, it just looks like a design pattern, but it's actually microprint.
Tiny microscopic words.
The complete text of The Man from Snowy River,
Mm.
and the man in the hat is, of course, Andrew Barton Paterson.
Better known to history and to basically everyone who has ever held a beer in an Australian pub as Banjo Paterson.
Right.
Now, usually, when you see a face on a banknote, you make certain assumptions.
Yeah.
You assume they're a statesman, a general, a monarch.
Someone.
Yeah.
Stiff. Someone who spent their life in boardrooms or parliaments. Part of the establishment.
Right. And most people, they see the hat, they know the name, and they think, okay, bush poet, wrote about horses, wrote Waltzing Matilda, national icon, and they just file them away in this mental box marked old colonial history.
He becomes the static, grandfatherly figure sitting under a gum tree.
Yes. And that is such a massive disservice because the dry history book version of Patterson, the one you get in school, it misses the actual human being entirely.
Oh, absolutely. When you really start to peel back the layers of his biography, when you read his personal letters and look at the trajectory of his life, you don't find a simple farm boy writing rhymes. Not at all.
That is exactly what blew my mind when we started researching this deep dive. This guy wasn't just a poet. I mean, he was a rock star of the 1890s. He was a high-powered solicitor handling complex legal cases in the city. He was a war correspondent hanging out with Winston Churchill.
And Rudyard Kipling? Don't forget Kipling.
Incredible. And as we're going to get into in quite some detail, he was the central figure in a messy, high-stakes romantic scandal that birthed the country's most famous song.
The tea is incredibly hot in this one, as they say.
It really is. We're going to get into the rumors, the womanizer claims, and the fact that he kept a box of chocolates for 40 years.
Which is just a wonderful little detail.
It's so human. So our mission today is to move beyond that flat image on the banknote. We want to meet the adventurer, the journalist, and the man whose specific vision of Australia arguably defined the national character we still talk about today.
It's a character study, really. We're looking at a man who constructed a romantic ideal of a country, a brand for Australia, if you will, even while living a life that was far more sophisticated, urban, and, well, contradictory than his poems might suggest.
So we've got the comprehensive biography, details on his literary works, his war diaries, even some analysis of his personal letters. Let's dive in. Where does the story of the banjo actually begin? Because despite the myth, he wasn't born with a pen in his hand, and he certainly wasn't born into security.
No, far from it. He was born on February 17th, 1864, at a property called Narambla, which is near Orange in New South Wales.
Okay, so for our international listeners, or even for Aussies who, stick to the coast, let's put that on the map. Orange is west of the Great Dividing Range. In the 1860s, this wasn't just the country.
No, this is the frontier.
This is only a decade or so after the gold rushes really kicked off, right? So the infrastructure is thin. It's remote.
Precisely. It was a frontier society. Paterson was the eldest of 7 children, and his father, Andrew Bogle Paterson, was a Scottish immigrant from Lanarkshire. And this is a really crucial detail for understanding banjo. His father wasn't part of the established landed gentry.
He wasn't sitting on old money.
Not at all. He was a grazier trying to make a go of it on the land.
We should probably define grazier for our global audience. Because we aren't just talking about a guy with a few cows and, a petting zoo.
No, not at all. In the Australian context, a grazier is a large-scale pastoralist, someone raising sheep or cattle, often on these vast tracts of land, for the production of wool or meat.
It's big business.
It is a high-risk, high-reward business. You are completely dependent on the global commodity markets and, more terrifyingly, on the Australian climate.
And for the Paterson family, that risk wasn't just some abstract concept. It bit them hard.
Oh, it did. They were living on a station, which is what we call a large ranch, named Buckenbaugh. But when young Andrew, our banjo, was just 5 years old, disaster struck. The region was hit by a massive flood, and his father lost his entire wool clip.
I want to pause on that for a second because it sounds almost abstract. Lost his wool clip. But in economic terms, that's catastrophic, isn't it?
It is total ruin. I mean, imagine working for 12 solid months. You breed the sheep, you keep them alive through drought and disease, you shear them, which is just backbreaking labor, and you process the wool. That physical pile of wool represents your entire income for the year.
It's everything. It's your mortgage payment, your food, your operating costs for the next year.
And then a river rises, and in a matter of hours, it's all washed away, gone.
And back then, in 1869, there's no FEMA. There's no government bailout. There's no insurance policy that's going to cover acts of God on the frontier.
Exactly. It forced them to sell up. It completely changed the family's destiny. They couldn't stay at Buckenbaugh. They had to move. And this is a recurring theme you see in bush life, the boom and the bust. It's something Paterson would later capture in his poetry, not because he studied it in a library, but because he lived the trauma of it as a 5-year-old boy.
That experience must have been seared into his memory.
I think so. The precariousness of it all.
So the family packs up their lives. They move to a place called Illawong, near Yes. Now, looking at the map and the historical context, this location seems pivotal to me. It wasn't just some quiet backwater tucked away in the hills.
No, it was positioned right on the main drag.
A main drag.
Precisely. Illawong was right near the main overland route between Melbourne and Sydney. You have to remember, the railway network wasn't fully connected yet. There were no highways. This dirt road was the lifeline of the colony. So as a boy, Paterson isn't just seeing sheep and gum trees. He's sitting at his front gate watching the arterial blood of the colony flow past.
Paint the picture for us. What is he actually seeing from that front gate?
Okay, so he's seeing the machinery of colonial transport. First, he's seeing the bullock teams.
Which are what exactly? For someone who's never seen one.
These are massive, heavy wagons hauling tons of wool or supplies, and they're pulled by these huge teams of 12, sometimes 20 oxen bullocks. They move incredibly slowly, they're immensely powerful, and the men who drove them, the bullockies, were famous for their colorful language and their toughness.
The truckers of their day?
A very slow version, yes. And then on the other end of the speed spectrum, he's seeing the Cobb & Co. coaches.
Ah, Cobb & Co. Legendary.
Think of it as the Wells Fargo stagecoach of Australia. They were the mail carriers, the passenger transport, the high-speed connection to the outside world. These coaches would come rattling through in clouds of dust, changing horses at stations, bringing news, mail, and, interesting strangers from the city.
It's like living on the side of Route 66 in the 1950s, or next to a major truck stop today. He's just watching the world go by.
And perhaps most significantly for Paterson's future work, he saw the drovers.
Another term we need to pin down. Drover.
A drover is a specialist stockman who moves livestock over long distances on the hoof. So they aren't farmers who stay in one place behind a fence. They are these nomadic experts who drive thousands of sheep or cattle, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of miles to market.
They were the cowboys of the Australian bush.
Right, but often dealing with much harsher terrain and longer distances. They were legendary figures.
And Paterson is just a kid, watching this parade of rough-and-tumble characters go past his house every day.
Specifically, he watched the horsemen from the Snowy Mountains and the Murrumbidgee River area. Now, these weren't just farmhands. These were men who lived in the saddle. The terrain in the Snowy Mountains is steep, it's scrubby, it's incredibly dangerous. To ride there, you needed a level of horsemanship that was almost acrobatic.
And he saw them showing off their skill.
He saw them at local picnic races and at polo matches.
That's the spark, isn't it? That's where the obsession begins. He's a kid fanboying over these guys who can ride anything, jump anything, go anywhere.
It's the origin story of the man from Snowy River archetype. He was idolizing these horsemen long before he ever wrote a word about them.
It absolutely imprinted on him. He saw a kind of nobility in their skill, in their connection with their horses, but there's another side to his upbringing that we really can't ignore.
Okay.
Despite this rough environment, he wasn't uneducated, not by a long shot. His mother, Rose Isabella Barton, was Australian-born and very well connected. She was actually related to Edmund Barton.
Wait, Edmund Barton? As in the guy who would eventually become the very first Prime Minister of Australia?
The very same.
Wow. Okay, so Paterson isn't just some random bush kid. He has blood ties to the emerging political elite.
That Barton middle name carried some weight. And his education really reflects that. He started with a governess at home, then went to a local bush school at Bynalong, but eventually the family scraped together the resources to send him to Sydney Grammar School, the big city. A huge change. He moves from the dust of Yas to a cottage in Gladesville called Rock End to attend this prestigious private school.
Which is a heritage site now. You can still visit it.
Right. He's doing well. He's a good student, a sportsman.
Mhm.
He was captain of the rugby team, I believe. But then we hit a snag, a failure that I think is really, really important to his trajectory.
Yes. At 16, he sat for the scholarship examination for the University of Sydney, and he failed.
Which honestly makes me like him more. The great literary genius flunked his entrance exam.
Well, it was a classic sliding doors moment, wasn't it? If he had passed, he might have gone into academia, he might have become a dry scholar of classics or a professor of history.
And we might never have gotten Clancy the Overflow.
Possibly not. Because he failed the scholarship, the family couldn't afford to just pay his way through university. So he had to get a job. He had to enter the real world immediately.
He needed a paycheck.
Exactly. So he entered into a legal clerkship. He started right at the bottom rung of a Sydney law firm. He studied law the hard way while working and was eventually admitted as a solicitor in 1886.
So for a significant part of his young adult life, Andrew Barton Paterson wasn't a poet. He was a lawyer. He was drafting contracts, dealing with wills, sitting in an office wearing a stiff collar and a suit.
A very different picture from the man on the horse.
Which brings us perfectly to part 2 of our deep dive, the double life. Because this duality is the thing that really defines him for me. By day, he's Mr. Paterson, the respectable solicitor, handling disputes and paperwork. But by night, he's the banjo.
It is a classic superhero dichotomy, isn't it? He started writing poetry around 1885 and submitting it to the Bulletin. Now, we cannot overstate the importance of the Bulletin in the 1890s.
What was the vibe of the Bulletin? Was it a newspaper? A magazine? What was its place in the culture?
It was a weekly magazine, but its nickname was the Bushman's Bible. It was radical, it was nationalist, it was funny, and it was incredibly popular. It was the primary cultural touchstone for the entire colony. It was where the Australian conversation was happening. If you wanted to be read, if you wanted to be part of that conversation, you published in the Bulletin.
And Paterson didn't use his real name. He signed his poems, The Banjo. Now, if you didn't know the backstory, you'd think maybe he played the instrument. But tell them where the name actually came from.
It was the name of his favorite racehorse.
I just love that. It's so unpretentious. It's like if I wrote serious, heart-wrenching poetry about the soul of the nation and signed it Fido or Sparky.
But it fits his character perfectly. It's a little bit self-deprecating. It ties back to that love of horses he developed as a kid at Illawong. It's signaled to the reader, I'm not a stuffy academic poet from the university. I'm a bloke who likes the track.
And under this pseudonym, he became a sensation.
Sensation might be an understatement. We're talking about the 1890s here. There's no internet, no TV, no radio. Poetry was a form of pop culture. He publishes Clancy of the Overflow in 1889 and then The Man from Snowy River in 1890, and people went absolutely nuts for this stuff.
How nuts are we talking?
The numbers back it up. When his first collection, The Man from Snowy River and Other Verses, was published in 1895 by Angus and Robertson, it sold 5,000 copies in just 4 months.
In a colony with a pretty small population, that's viral status. That's like a platinum record today. The banjo became a household name. He was giving people something they desperately wanted.
And that brings us to the why. Why was he so popular? This connects directly to his famous relationship and rivalry with Henry Lawson.
Ah, the rap beef of the 1890s, Lawson versus Paterson. This is one of my favorite parts of Australian literary history.
It was a fascinating dynamic. They were friends, they drank together, but they represented two very different philosophies about what Australia was and what it should be. They even had a poetry slam of sorts in the pages of the Bulletin, writing poems back and forth, attacking each other's view of the bush.
So break it down for us. What was the core of the disagreement?
It was about the reality of bush life versus the romance of it. Henry Lawson, who wrote these famous, stark, short stories like The Drover's Wife, portrayed the bush as hard, unforgiving, and bleak.
Right.
He focused on the struggle, the poverty, the loneliness, the mud. He wrote about the silence that drives people mad. He saw the tragedy in it.
Lawson is like the gritty documentary filmmaker.
Yeah.
He's saying, look at this starvation, look at this despair, stop pretending it's some grand adventure.
Whereas Paterson was the romantic. He was influenced by poets like John Farrell. He saw the Bushman as a hero, an underdog, tough, independent, stoic, riding free across these vast sunlit plains. In Paterson's world, the bush was a place of adventure and freedom, not just misery and hardship.
Clancy of the Overflow is the perfect example of this. You've got the narrator stuck in a dingy little office in the dusty, dirty city, which is obviously Paterson projecting his own feelings about being a lawyer.
Clearly.
And he's just wishing he was out droving with Clancy.
Exactly. And he sees the vision splendid of the sunlit plains extended.
That line, that one line, it makes you want to quit your job and buy a horse immediately. It's pure escapism.
And that is why Paterson won the popular vote, so to speak. Australia was forming its national identity at this time. Remember, Federation is just around the corner in 1901. The separate colonies were about to become a single nation. And the country wanted to look in the mirror and see the man from Snowy River, capable, brave, dashing.
It didn't necessarily want to see the broken-down struggle that Lawson depicted.
Even if Lawson's view was arguably more realistic for the average farmer or drover's wife, Paterson gave Australia the hero it wanted to be.
He invented the Aussie legend.
He certainly crystallized it. But here's the great irony. While he was building this national myth of the jolly swagman and the free-riding bushman, his own personal life was about to get very, very complicated. And this leads us to the dark, soapy story behind the most famous song in Australian history.
Waltzing Matilda, the unofficial national anthem. Everyone knows the tune. Everyone knows the chorus. Once a jolly swagman camped by a billabong. But the story of how it was written, it plays out like a season finale of a drama series.
It really does. It takes us to 1895. Paterson is at the absolute height of his fame. He travels north to Queensland to a place called Dagworth Station, which is near the town of Winton.
He's not traveling alone, though. This is key. He's with his fiancée, Sarah Riley.
Sarah Riley. And they had been engaged for 8 years.
8 years. That is a massively long engagement. Even for the 19th century, you have to wonder why they hadn't tied the knot yet.
Indeed. It suggests a certain hesitation, perhaps on his part. So Banjo and Sarah go to Dagworth Station. Sarah's there to visit her old school friend, a woman named Christina McPherson.
So the cast is set. The famous poet, his long-suffering fiancée, and the fiancée's best friend. This has all the makings of a disaster.
And it was. Christina McPherson had recently been to a race meeting in Warrnambool, Victoria. While she was there, she heard a band playing this really catchy tune, a Scottish marching tune called the Craigielee, most likely. It got stuck in her head.
A classic earworm.
Yes. So back at Dagworth, she's playing this tune on an auto harp.
An auto harp. For those wondering, that's a zither-like string instrument.
Very.
Parlor music chic for the 1890s.
Very. And Banjo hears it. He likes the rhythm. And, inspired by a story he'd heard at the station about a striking shearer who had committed suicide in a waterhole rather than be captured by police for stealing a sheep.
Okay, that's a much darker origin than I think most people realize.
Oh, it's very dark. The Great Shearers' Strike was a violent quasi-civil war in the outback. So Paterson takes that story and starts writing lyrics to fit Christina's music.
We should probably pause and just explain the lyrics for anyone who doesn't know them, because they are actually quite rebellious.
They really are.
A swagman is a drifter, a transient worker carrying his swag or bedroll. He steals a jumbuck, which is just a slang term for a sheep to eat. The squatter, the rich landowner, comes down with the troopers, the police, and rather than go to jail, the swagman jumps into the billabong, the waterhole, and drowns himself.
It is a song about class warfare. It is fundamentally anti-authority. It celebrates the thief over the police.
So you've got Banjo and Christina, heads together over the auto harp, collaborating, laughing, making this rebellious music together. And meanwhile, Sarah Riley, the fiancée of 8 years, is where?
Well, she was there, and she presumably wasn't happy, because the outcome of this creative little visit was explosive. The engagement to Sarah Riley was abruptly called off.
Dumped at the station. After 8 years.
And Paterson was suddenly asked to leave the property. He was effectively kicked out.
Wow. That is not the behavior of a respectable gentleman solicitor.
Historians and biographers have looked at this for years. The consensus is pretty clear. Paterson was known to be a bit of a womanizer, and he almost certainly engaged in a scandalous romantic liaison with Christina McPherson right under his fiancée's nose.
The scandal. So, Waltzing Matilda, this wholesome song we teach kindergartners, was written by a lawyer who was busy cheating on his long-term fiancée with her best friend.
It creates a fascinating juxtaposition. The song is so innocent in the public consciousness, a jaunty tune about freedom. But its birth was steeped in betrayal and social disgrace.
And what happened to Sarah Riley, the jilted fiancée?
She never married. She was reportedly devastated by the whole affair. It's a tragic side note to this jaunty national anthem.
It really changes how you hear the song. It adds this entire layer of forbidden romance and heartbreak. But Paterson doesn't seem to slow down to mourn the relationship. He doesn't just go back to drafting wills. The late 1890s arrive, and the world is changing. There's a war brewing.
The Second Boer War in South Africa. And this is where Paterson sheds the lawyer skin almost completely. He leaves the law behind to become a war correspondent.
This is a huge pivot. He's essentially becoming a foreign correspondent for a major, major conflict.
He signs on with two of the biggest papers, the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age. He sails to South Africa in October 1899. And this isn't Zoom reporting or, sitting in a hotel in the capital. He is on the ground, on a horse, right in the thick of the action.
And the Boer War was a nasty conflict. British Empire versus the Boer republics. Guerrilla warfare, commando raids. It was very dangerous.
It was. And because of his fame and his charm, Paterson wasn't just observing from a distance. He was rubbing shoulders with the heavyweights of the British Empire. He met Lord Kitchener, Lord Roberts, General Haig, and he met other correspondents who would go on to be absolute legends.
Who did he run into?
Well, Winston Churchill, for one.
Winston Churchill.
And Rudyard Kipling.
Can you just imagine the dinner conversation? Banjo Paterson, Rudyard Kipling, and a young Winston Churchill, who was also a journalist at the time, right? He wasn't the prime minister yet.
No, Churchill was covering the war for the Morning Post. That trio represents three fascinatingly different views of the British Empire. You've got Kipling, the imperialist cheerleader, Churchill, the ambitious politician-in-waiting, and Paterson, the Australian nationalist, observing the mother country at war.
That is a power trio. And Paterson wasn't just tagging along. He was getting scoops.
He was a very effective correspondent. He was actually the first correspondent to ride into Bloemfontein after its surrender.
That's a massive scoop. He beat everyone else, including Churchill, to the punch on that one.
He sent back these graphic, gripping accounts of the relief of Kimberley and the capture of Pretoria. His writing style, that observational, punchy, descriptive style he'd honed on the Bush ballads, made his war reporting incredibly vivid for the readers back home. He didn't write in dry military jargon. He wrote about the smell of the dust and the sound of the horses.
And speaking of vivid details, there's a story that came out just recently in 2020 that I absolutely love. It involves chocolate.
Ah, yes. The Queen Victoria chocolates.
Tell the listener about this, because this humanizes him so much for me.
So, in 1900, Queen Victoria commissioned a gift for her troops serving in South Africa. These were tins of Cadbury chocolates. It was a morale booster, a personal gift from the monarch to the soldiers on the front line.
Here's some chocolate. Sorry about the dysentery and the bullets.
Essentially, Paterson, being a correspondent embedded with the troops, received one of these tins. But here's the strange part. He didn't eat them. He kept them. In 2020, researchers at the National Library of Australia were going through Paterson's papers, which had been donated years prior, and they found the tin. And inside,
The chocolates were still there.
a 120-year-old chocolate, still in the straw packing, a little decayed perhaps, but fundamentally intact.
That is just wild. Why did he keep them? Was he a hoarder? Was he sentimental? Or did he just think British chocolate tasted bad?
I think it speaks to a certain sentimentality and a sense of history. He was a collector of experiences. He kept that tin for 40 years until his death. It was a tangible link to that high-adventure period of his life. He knew even then that he was living through a major historical moment.
It's such a human detail. He's this tough war correspondent riding into captured cities. But he can't bring himself to eat the Queen's chocolate.
After the Boer War, his adventures continued. He also covered the Boxer Rebellion in China, where he met the famous correspondent George Chinese Morrison. He really was a true global adventurer in these years. He eventually returned to Sydney and became an editor for the Evening News and the Town Country Journal.
But the call of the bush, that Clancy lifestyle, it never really left him, did it? Because in 1908, he makes another huge life change. He decides to stop just writing about the bush and actually try to live it.
He does. He abandons journalism and the city. He moves his family, he had finally married, to a woman named Alice Emily Walker in 1903 to a 16,000-hectare property near Yaos.
16,000 hectares. That is a serious spread. That's not a hobby farm. He's trying to be the grazier his father was. He's trying to be the man from Snowy River for real.
But again, as we discussed with his father's story, the reality of the bush is hard. He lived there for a few years, but it wasn't a permanent success in the way his legal or literary career was. It was difficult work. And then the world went to war again.
World War I, 1914. Paterson is in his 50s now. He's not a young man anymore. He's a national celebrity, a middle-aged father. Most men his age would sit this one out.
But he was desperate to go. He felt a duty or maybe a need for that adrenaline again. He tried to get a job as a correspondent in Flanders covering the Western Front, but he couldn't secure the position.
Denied, but he doesn't give up.
No, he puts his ego aside. And this is the part of his story that really impresses me. This famous man, this national icon, signs up as an ambulance driver for the Australian Voluntary Hospital in France.
That is humility. From war correspondent hanging with Churchill to driving an ambulance in the mud. There's no glory in that.
None at all. Eventually, though, the Army realized who he was and, more importantly, what he knew. His specific skill set was finally recognized. He was commissioned in the 2nd Remount Unit.
The remount unit, that sounds like horses.
Exactly, horses. We forget that World War I was still powered by horses. The Army needed thousands of them for the cavalry, for transport, for pulling artillery, and they needed someone who knew horses inside and out to manage them, train them, and transport them. Who better than the banjo?
It's poetic, literally. The man who wrote the Bible on Australian horsemen spends the Great War taking care of the Army's horses.
He rose to the rank of major. He transported horses to Africa, China, and Egypt. He was the commanding officer of the Remount Unit based in Cairo. It fits him perfectly. While the young men, the Clancys of the next generation, were in the trenches at Gallipoli or the Somme, Paterson was ensuring the animals he loved so much were cared for.
And his wife Alice wasn't just sitting at home knitting either.
No, she joined the Red Cross and worked in an ambulance unit near him. It was very much a family commitment to the war effort.
So he comes back in 1919. He's seen 2 major wars. He's tried to live the bush life. He's been a lawyer. He's a celebrity. What does a guy like that do in the 1920s? Retire?
This is one of the most surprising twists in his entire career. He pivots again. He becomes a sports journalist.
Kidding, what?
He started covering rugby league for the Sydney Sportsman.
Banjo Paterson, the bush poet covering the footy. That is absolutely amazing. The man from Snowy River, analyzing a scrum at Redfern Oval.
It just shows his adaptability. He was a professional writer. He wrote what people wanted to read. He wasn't precious about high art. If the story was rugby league, he wrote about rugby league. He understood the Australian working class. They loved poetry in the 1890s, and they loved rugby league in the 1920s. He followed the audience.
He really was a working journalist right up until the end. He was appointed a commander of the British Empire, a CBE, in 1938, finally getting that official royal recognition. And he passed away in 1941 of a heart attack right there in Sydney.
Leaving behind a legacy that is, frankly, staggering.
Let's talk about that legacy. Part 6, Works and Legacy. Obviously, the poems are the core of it.
Clancy, Snowy River, Moldbill's Bicycle, the Geebum Polo Club. I mean, these are poems that are taught in almost every Australian school. They are part of the vernacular. Even if you don't read poetry, you know the rhythms and you know the stories.
And he also wrote novels like An Outback Marriage and The Shearer's Colt, and the children's book, The Animals Noah Forgot.
But the cultural impact goes so far beyond the books. We started with the $10 note. That's a high honor. But consider this. In 1983, when astronauts on the Space Shuttle Columbia wanted to broadcast a song from space to Earth, the first Australian song played from orbit, what did they play?
Don't tell me.
A rendition of Waltzing Matilda by the country music legend Slim Dusty.
Banjo went to space.
His words did. And then you have the films. The Man from Snowy River movie in 1982, it starred Jack Thompson, who, by the way, has released wonderful audio recordings of Paterson's poems. That movie was a massive international hit. It revitalized the myth for a whole new generation who maybe hadn't read the poems but loved the visual spectacle of it all.
And the mystery poem. We mentioned the chocolates, but they also found a previously unknown poem in a Boer War diary back in 2008.
Yes. It just shows that there is still material out there. He was so prolific, writing in diaries and notebooks and letters, that we are still discovering his work almost a century after his death.
So we've unpacked a lot. We've gone from the Flug at Narambla to the law offices of Sydney. We've seen him write a viral hit, break a heart at Dagworth Station, ride into Bloemfontein with the Army, drive ambulances in France, and report on rugby.
It is a life of remarkable breadth and contradictions.
What's the big takeaway for you? If you had to sum up Banjo Paterson, not the icon of the banknote, but the man, what do you see?
I see a man who was a master of observation and adaptation. He saw what Australia wanted to be, and he gave it to them in beautiful, rhythmic verse. He didn't just document the country. He, in many ways, invented a version of it. He created the archetype of the stoic, capable horseman. And even though he was a city lawyer for much of his life, He understood that deep longing for the vision splendid. He bridged the gap between the city and the bush better than anyone else.
He was the ultimate storyteller. He sold the dream. He was the man from Snowy River. But he was also the sophisticated guy who could navigate a royal reception or a scandalous love affair. He contained multitudes.
He was a complex man who created a simple, powerful mythology, and perhaps that is why he endures. We need the myth.
And that leaves us with something to think about. I want to leave you with this one final thought. Consider Waltzing Matilda again. It is the song that represents the Australian spirit to the world. A song about a swag man, a drifter, who chooses death over capture.
Freedom at all costs. An anti-authoritarian streak.
But it was written by a solicitor, a man of the law, a man who was, at that very moment, navigating a complex web of social expectations, class, and personal betrayal.
It is a profound contradiction right at the heart of our unofficial anthem.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe national identity isn't about facts. It's about the stories we choose to tell ourselves.
Yeah.
We choose the swag man, not the solicitor. We choose the romance, not the reality. So what does that say about us? What does that say about the stories we choose to cherish?
A question worth pondering.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the Ballad of the Banjo.
It's been a pleasure.
See you in the next deep dive.